I lived with my wife for almost 40 years. We got married when I was 20 and she was 19. We've been through everything, arguments and reconciliations. But I was sure that in all that time we never betrayed each other. It's hard to live that long with a very beautiful woman and never doubt her love and loyalty. Yet no matter where life took me, she was always by my side. We had two wonderful children, a son named Paul and a daughter named Katie. Now they're grown up with their own families and children. I was confident that we had a peaceful and serene old age ahead of us, surrounded by our beloved grandchildren. I'm a doctor and served in the Army for 25 years, reaching the rank of colonel in the medical service. I retired 10 years ago, but I still work in a private clinic. Though I don't hold a scalpel often anymore, due to my age, I still see patients as a therapist. My wife, Nastya, also still works as a designer at an advertising firm. Financially, we were fine. We just enjoyed working. During my service, I traveled a lot. I spent nearly a year in Africa, was in Mongolia and Vietnam, though I barely saw these places because a doctor's work is almost 24/7, especially for a military doctor. Then there were the hotspots in the former Soviet Union. But every time I returned home, I knew I would be welcomed by my loving wife and children. At least, I thought so. It turned out I was just trying to believe that was true. Despite her age, my wife managed to keep her natural beauty. She always took care of herself, maintaining her youthful figure and a face without a single wrinkle. When we walked together, people often thought she was my young lover because of the sharp contrast between us. A young blonde and an older man. Nastya found this amusing, and I enjoyed it too. But I was wrong to find it funny. Everything changed one rainy November evening. Have you ever noticed how life-changing events tend to happen on rainy autumn evenings, as if the dying nature is trying to drag you down with it? It was late autumn, and a cold wind was driving raindrops against the window. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through documents, looking for my medical records. I had a checkup on Monday, and needed to find my vaccination records. Nastya wasn't home. She had gone to the city to buy groceries and prepare our Sunday dinner. While sorting through old documents, some yellowed with age, I suddenly found something that shocked me. It was an excerpt from Nastya's medical records, dated to the period when I was on a long mission, almost a year away. It was about a pregnancy and premature birth. Nastya had given birth to a 6-month-old baby who lived for 3 days and then died. The records included blood tests, ultrasound results, and more. The baby's Rh factor was negative, and the blood type was group 3. My wife and I both had group 2 blood and a positive Rh factor. Our child couldn't have had those blood characteristics. The baby couldn't be mine because I wasn't even in the country at the time. I stared at the document, unable to process my thoughts. Nastya had been unfaithful while I was away. She had managed to get pregnant and almost gave birth to another man's child. Just half an hour earlier, I believed I had a strong family, a loving wife, and a bright future. Now, everything seemed ruined. I tried to stay calm and carefully put the documents back. I hid the damning excerpt in my briefcase. The most important thing was to remain composed and not act rashly. Nastya's infidelity was a documented fact. Honestly, I wanted to confront her as soon as she came home, but I needed to understand everything first. Our children were clearly ours, with a 9-year age gap between them. Both Paul and Katie had group 2 blood. They both resembled me when I was younger. There was no doubt I was their father. But that didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't understand why Nastya had done this to me. We married for love. I had courted her for almost a year. Other women didn't exist for me, even though I was attractive and received plenty of attention from the opposite sex. For me, there was only one woman, my Nastya. Throughout our life together, I tried to surround her with care and attention. Sometimes it seemed like my single life had never existed. Dear viewers, more than 90% watch my content without subscribing. If you still have not subscribed, then I ask you to do so. For me, this is the best motivation to continue. My wife was everything to me, and even more than that. I went out onto the balcony for some fresh air. Looking down, I saw a car stop near our building under the streetlight. Nastya got out, followed by a man who opened the back door and took out a bag. Nastya quickly kissed him on the cheek, took the bags, and went inside. The man got back into the car and drove away slowly. The more I saw, the worse it got. When Nastya came home, she kissed me on the cheek, and I smelled alcohol. She asked why I looked so grumpy and explained she had some champagne with her friend Marina. I wiped her lipstick off my cheek and asked if Marina had given her a ride. Nastya looked at me with a strange expression, clearly unsure how to answer. Then she started to explain, saying she took a taxi and a friend had given her a lift. You know the drill. She was trying to find the right words. I asked if it was a close friend since she kissed him goodbye. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the neighbors might hear it. To occupy myself and calm down, I got up and grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet. Nastya looked at me, scared. I told her I'd seen her from the balcony. It took a lot of effort to stay calm and not start yelling. I asked if the kiss was the fare for the ride. She started to explain, but I interrupted her and asked her to sit down because I had a few questions. I pulled out the stool and the damning medical record from my briefcase. I placed it in front of Nastya and asked what it was. She flipped through a few pages and quickly recoiled. She asked if I had read it. I asked whose baby it was and what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to drink the whiskey. After a moment of silence, she started to speak in an unexpectedly calm voice. She said it was bound to happen eventually, and maybe it was for the best that it happened now. In a steady voice, she told me about a young man she met while I was away. He was 11 years younger than her, and she fell in love with him. It was like a spell, and she couldn't help herself. At first, she met him in secret, but then she sent our kids to her mom's and moved him into our apartment. They lived as husband and wife, and she got pregnant. He proposed to her, a married woman and mother of my 2 children. In her love-struck state, she secretly hoped I wouldn't return at all, so everything would settle down, and they could get married and be together. But things didn't work out. The baby was born prematurely and died 3 days later. She broke down crying. I realized she didn't care about our other kids back then. After the baby's death, their relationship cooled, and they drifted apart. Eventually, a young woman appeared, and her lover left her for new adventures. Nastya waited for me to return and played the role of a loving wife all these years. I was in shock, to say the least. I lost the ability to think or speak. I just stared at the wall, my mind blank. But that wasn't the end of it. 6 months ago, her lover returned to our city, and their passion reignited. She had loved him all these years and fell into his arms like a ripe fruit. They've been seeing each other ever since, and she wants to start a new life with him, a life where I have no place. She had spent 40 years with me, given me her best years, and now, with our children grown, she wanted to start over with her true love. As she spoke, I realized she knew that each word was killing me. For a moment, she reminded me of an executioner, emotionlessly doing his job. It's nothing personal. It's just love. It happens. Now, she could finally exhale and have a drink. I poured another glass of whiskey, drank it in one gulp, and thought how strange it was that the drink had no effect. Maybe it had gone flat. I took the bottle and held it up to the light. The color seemed normal. I figured I just needed to pour more. I considered drinking straight from the bottle. You ever notice how whiskey bottles have a wide, convenient neck like a decanter? It's very handy. You don't even need a glass. Nastya sat across from me in silence. I started to worry that something might have happened to her or if she had run out of energy. She had been so articulate, skillfully deceiving me for years. If I hadn't found that record, I would have never known. Well done, Nastya, a true woman of deceit. And those words she said, it happens. Of course it happens. No big deal. I pushed the stool aside and went to the bedroom. Without saying a word, I packed some clothes in a bag and headed for the door. Nastya asked if it was really necessary to leave at night. I glanced back at her silhouetted in the doorway. Was she going to cry, or was she going to gloat? She stood there, helpless, like a victim of violence. I suddenly felt sickened by her, not because of her betrayal, but because of her deceitful love. We shared everything for so many years, and yet she managed to fool me. I gave her a look full of contempt, then opened the door and walked out. I got into my car and drove to our dacha. Luckily, the roads were empty, and the drive took less than an hour. In the cold, I fumbled with the lock, opened the door, and found the house cold and damp. I turned on the heater, put my things away, and sat in the kitchen, staring at the blank wall. My hands shook, and my thoughts wandered aimlessly. There was a feeling of emptiness inside me, an absence of will and strength. There was only one thought in my head. It happens. It took me about a month to come to terms with what had happened and to figure out my next steps. I rented a small apartment near my work and gradually moved my belongings from our shared home. I didn't want to live in that house anymore. I also didn't want to see Nastya, who was now living with her lover. Our children and grandchildren visited, bringing some comfort. They didn't know the full story. They just thought we had grown apart. I did my best to move on, to build a new life from the shattered pieces of the old one. I threw myself into work, took up new hobbies, and reconnected with old friends. Life went on, and I slowly healed. But deep down, the scars remained. The trust I had in Nastya was gone, replaced by a lingering sense of betrayal. I didn't hate her. I just felt an overwhelming sense of loss. 40 years of my life felt like a lie, but I learned to accept it. It happens, I told myself, and maybe that's true. A bright light pierced my eyes like a SWAT team bursting into a hideout. "Finally!" a male voice said nearby. With difficulty, I turned my head. "Welcome back, Yuri Ivanovich," my boss said, not hiding his relief as he patted my arm. "Where am I?" The words came out with effort. "You're in our clinic. You were brought in last night with a traumatic brain injury. Your documents were in order, so they called us, and we had you transferred and operated on immediately. The surgery was successful, and you're back with us. We've informed your children and your wife. Your son is on his way." The detective said he'd come by this afternoon. Wife? My heart sank at the mention. I didn't have a wife anymore. The door creaked open. "Dad, hey, how are you?" My son Pavel kissed me on the cheek. "You really had us worried." He carefully placed a bag on the nightstand. "Here are some fruits and juice. They're not letting you have much else yet. Mom couldn't come. She has some urgent matters." Dear viewers, I ask you to subscribe to the channel under this video. I will be very grateful to you. "She doesn't need to come," I replied. "All right, just don't worry about it." Pasha seemed to know about our split. I wondered what Nastya had told him. Whatever ex-wives say in such situations, didn't love him, didn't appreciate him, crushed her spirit. Enough with the self-pity. 2 weeks later, I was discharged. Nastya visited twice, but I refused to see her. The past didn't matter. I rented a small apartment near the clinic where I worked and started adjusting to single life. The breakup had a mixed effect on me. There was pain and betrayal, but also new, uncertain possibilities. One thing I knew for sure: no new relationships. The breakup was a harsh lesson. After the divorce, I not only lost my wife, but also my home. The kids took a neutral stance but seemed to side with their mother more. I returned to work and threw myself into surgery, using it to numb the emotional pain, and it worked. I didn't turn to alcohol like some divorced men. About 2 months later, my old friend called and asked to meet. "Yura, remember a few years ago I borrowed a large sum from you?" That's how Sergey began. I remembered. 3 years ago, he had serious business problems and no one to turn to. I had just sold my mother's apartment and had the money. I didn't set a deadline for repayment, understanding he couldn't return it right away. But now his business was back on track, yet he hadn't hurried to repay me. "Thanks for helping me back then. Now I'm back on my feet, and my business is doing very well," Sergey continued. "I invested your money, and it's been bringing in good dividends." He handed me a bank card. "This is your loan with interest. 5 times what you lent me." It came at the right time. I bought a small cottage near the city and a new car. I didn't have time for household chores, so I hired a helper. She was almost 15 years younger, a young woman who had already been married. She had no children due to infertility, and her husband eventually left her for another woman. A neighbor told me this. Natasha herself didn't talk much about it. I had no plans for her beyond being a helper. About 6 months passed. One day, while chopping wood, I felt a sharp pain in my head and lost consciousness. I woke up in the hospital with Natasha by my side. She had called an ambulance and stayed with me, holding my head in her lap until help arrived. It turned out my head injury wasn't so simple. After this, I saw Natasha differently. She was a beautiful woman, and our relationship naturally grew closer. One day I proposed to her. We got married in the fall. Knowing we couldn't have children made our relationship more relaxed. 3 months after the wedding, Natasha felt unwell. Headaches, fatigue. I took her to my clinic. To our astonishment, she was nearly 2 months pregnant.
"Whatever you say, I'm keeping the baby," Natasha told me. I held her close and kissed her. I realized then that when fate closes one door, it opens another. Life was getting back on track. Then, just before New Year's, Nastya called. "We need to meet," she said, sounding plaintive. "I reserved a table at a restaurant. Please come at 7. I went. Nastya sat across from me, her demeanor humble and remorseful. "Yura, forgive me. There hasn't been a day I haven't thought of you. I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, our family, our children." Tears welled up in her eyes. I silently watched her, the woman I once loved passionately, the woman I would have given my life for without hesitation, the woman who twice coldly betrayed me, who lied to me for nearly 20 years, who erased me from her life for another man. Now she wanted to come back. Nastya kept saying that her time without me made her realize how much she loved me, that I was the only real man in her life. Her words reminded me of a Greek siren, luring me with fantasies of belonging only to me.
"Forgive me," she repeated like a mantra. I watched her lips, bright with lipstick, spewing sweet words, and imagined her kissing and caressing her lover. Did she really think I would believe her? That she was confused? Didn't know what she wanted? This woman who had a child with her lover, who spent her time with another man, never thinking of me, had returned because she loved only me? She had justified her betrayal and left me without hesitation. She had enjoyed her time with her lover, and now, realizing he was only using her for fun until her money ran out, she was back. Did she think I was stupid enough to believe her? I listened to her remorseful monologue without saying a word. I wasn't gloating. I felt a human pity for her. After all, we had spent 40 years together, but it was time to end this meeting. My phone rang. It was Natasha asking if she should come get me. I gave her the address and started to say goodbye. "Is that your woman?" Nastya asked softly, tears in her eyes. "Yes." "How long have you been together?" "Almost a year and a half now." I stood up. "Goodbye, Nastya. Try to be happy." I left the restaurant. Nastya stood with her hands clasped to her chest, watching me through the festively decorated window. Life continued around me. People hurried past. Bright lights advertised Coca-Cola. "Drink and feel joy." Lies. I got in my car and turned the key. The engine purred smoothly. I signaled left and merged into the traffic, feeling assured with Natasha by my side that we'd spend tomorrow together, and all the days after that.